By any measure, Stephen Hawking's life was incredible, even more so because in the 1960s he was diagnosed with ALS, or motor neurone disease, and given just a few years to live. This rare form of motor neuron disease left him virtually paralysed, unable to express his profound vision of humanity and science without a voice synthesizer.
At one point, I thought I would see the end of physics as we know it, but now I think the wonder of discovery will continue long after I am gone.
But this was never a man bound by his own physical limitations. He revelled in a zero-gravity flight, freeing him, he said, from the confines of his wheelchair. He also wrote a series of children's books about space with his daughter Lucy. He had 2 other children and 3 grandchildren. For more than 3 decades, he was a professor at Cambridge University's Department of Applied Mathematics and Theoretical Physics, specialising in the study of black holes, and revered as a member of the academic elite. But Professor Hawking also did much to popularise science, playing himself in Star Trek,
Processed in the opposite direction.
and The Simpsons. In 2014, his life and romance with wife Jane Wilde was depicted on the big screen in the acclaimed film The Theory of Everything.
So the universe getting smaller and smaller, getting denser and denser, hotter and hotter as we...
You mean wind back the clock?
Yeah, exactly, wind back the clock.
Hawking consulted on the biodrama, which earned 5 Academy Award nominations and a Best Actor win for Eddie Redmayne for his portrayal of the physicist. Hawking's most famous work, A Brief History of Time, remains one of the best-selling science books ever written, and he was deeply concerned with humanity's survival.
I see great dangers for the human race. There have been a number of times in the past when its survival has been a question of touch and go. The frequency of such occasions is likely to increase in the future. We shall need great care and judgment to negotiate them all successfully. But I'm an optimist. If we can avoid disaster for the next 2 centuries, our species should be safe as we spread into space.
He was, as ever, looking firmly to the future.
Medicine has not been able to cure me, so I rely on technology to help me communicate and live.
That vital system that Professor Stephen Hawking relies on has recently got an upgrade. Tasks that used to take 3 to 4 minutes, like opening a Word document, now take around 10 seconds. Intel has been working with Hawking for decades, and the latest upgrade was over 2 years in the making.
So we completely changed the way that he's interfacing with these aspects of the system to have him not rely on the mouse. So based on whatever he happens to be doing, we would surface the most logical things that he might want to do.
That also applies to Hawking's text-to-speech system. UK startup SwiftKey, whose software runs predictive text apps on smartphones, has doubled Hawking's speech rate. It considers what Hawking was last writing, whether there were any errors, and then tries to predict which character he might choose next. To do that, the SwiftKey program has to learn how Hawking writes and speaks by analyzing dozens of his documents, some published, others not.
The tests we ran showed that of a given body of text made up of a certain number of characters, Professor Hawking would actually only have to enter around 15 to 20% of those characters, and the rest would be inferred.
Now here's the crazy part. Everything Stephen Hawking does on his computer is triggered by one muscle in his cheek. An infrared sensor detects when his cheek muscle moves up, just the way our smartphones can sense when it's close to the face. Future versions of this technology are aiming to take a bigger range of movement into account.
But he can actually today say yes and no by moving, his eyebrows and by pulling his mouth. So one of the things that we've been working on is using essentially a camera system to detect these different movements. So now he can, for example, undo things by saying no, rather than having to go and manipulate the whole screen to get to a backspace button, for example.
Intel is even trying to develop brain control interfaces, which could help people who can no longer move any muscles at all. That won't necessarily happen to Stephen Hawking Hawking. But with the market forecast to reach $55 billion in 2016, it represents the next leap for assistive technologies.
Push it back. There we go. Away. Okay, 0. Thank you.
Good evening. Very special program tonight. Stephen Hawking is a theoretical physicist. He was the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics at the University of Cambridge for 30 years. He's the 2009 recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom and co-author of a brilliant and controversial new book, The Grand Design. And we welcome him back to Larry King Live. We have a series of questions planned. Let's get right to it. Stephen, why is it important to find the grand design of our universe?
I believe everyone should have a broad picture of how the universe operates and our place in it. It is a basic human desire, and it also puts our other worries in perspective.
You say that science can explain the universe without the need for a creator. Well, what is that explanation? Why is there something instead of nothing?
Gravity and quantum theory cause universes to be created spontaneously out of nothing.
You write that because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Will you tell me how that law came into existence?
Gravity is a consequence of M theory, which is the only possible unified theory. It is like saying, y is 2 plus 2, 4.
I guess simply put, do you believe in God?
God may exist, but science can explain the universe without the need for a creator.
So he may exist. I'll pick up on that with the panel. Your book has stirred a lot of controversy. Why do you think people react so strongly to your contention that it's not necessary to invoke God to explain the creation of the universe?
Science is increasingly answering questions that used to be the province of religion.
One of your colleagues at Cambridge says that science provides us with a narrative as to how existence may happen, but theology addresses the meaning of the narrative. How do you respond to that?
The scientific account is complete. Theology is unnecessary.
Pretty directly put. What gives your life, your existence, meaning?
I have a full and satisfying life. My work and my family are very important to me.
You recently said that you see great dangers for the human race. What are the sources of these dangers? Is it mankind itself or external factors?
We are in danger of destroying ourselves by our greed and stupidity. We cannot remain looking inwards at ourselves on a small and increasingly polluted and overcrowded planet.
Well, then what are mankind's chances of surviving these dangers?
If we can get through the next few hundred years, we should have spread out into space. Then, an isolated disaster will not wipe out the entire human race.
We got to get through the next 200 years, though. We'll be right back with more of the directly responsive Stephen Hawking.
According to M theory, ours is not the only universe. Instead, M theory predicts that a great many universes were created out of nothing. Their creation does not require the intervention of some supernatural being or God. Rather, these multiple universes arise naturally from physical law. They are a prediction of science.
We're back with Stephen Hawking. He's in Cambridge, England. He's the co-author, and we're going to meet the co-author in a little while, of The Grand Design. You have written, Stephen, that time travel was once considered scientific heresy. How likely is it that time travel will one day become a reality?
Time travel used to be thought of as science fiction, but Einstein's theory of general relativity allows the possibility that we could warp space-time so much that you could fly off in a rocket and return before you set out. I was one of the first to write about the conditions under which this would be possible. Unfortunately, it is likely that the warping would destroy the spaceship and maybe the space-time itself.
If you could time travel, would you go forward or backward?
I would go forward and find if M theory is indeed the theory of everything.
Do you have a hero? Who is your hero? And if so, why?
Galileo, the first modern scientist who realized the importance of observation. I feel closest to him because he followed his nose and was a bit of a rebel.
You have said that experiencing zero gravity is one of the most meaningful experiences you've ever had. Why?
Zero gravity was amazing. I could have gone on and on. Being confined to a wheelchair doesn't bother me, as my mind is free to roam the universe, but it felt wonderful to be weightless.
What, Stephen, do you most hope people take away from your new book, The Grand Design? In your opinion, and it's a great book with a lot of important points, what is the most important point in the book?
That science can explain the universe, and that we don't need God to explain why there is something rather than nothing, or why the laws of nature are what they are.
What quality or lesson would you most like to pass on to your children?
Look up at the stars, not down at your feet.
Succinct. And Stephen, finally, you are 68 years old. You'll be 69 in January. Your many admirers always worry about and wonder about your health. So can you tell us how you're doing?
When I was first diagnosed with ALS, I was given 2 years to live. Now, 45 years later, I'm doing pretty well.